Opening the Door to Medical and Scientific Discoveries That Can Save Millions of American Lives But Has Never Been Allowed to See the Light of Day by Dr. Gary Null. Quite the title, right? It really sets the stage. It really does. But imagine you are walking into this prestigious research institute back in 1971. Okay, I'm picturing it. So the air smells like, antiseptic and old paper. And you are led up to a cleaned out storage room on the third floor. It's a storage room. Yeah, literally a storage room. And you're told to simply sit there and focus your attention on a cage of dying rats. Wow. Just focus your attention. Right? You don't touch them. You don't give them a single drop of medicine. In fact, you don't even know they have terminal cancer. Which is wild. Totally wild. Yet weeks later, the tumors in those rats have completely vanished. It sounds like science fiction. I know. But today, we are opening the door to a text that claims this didn't just happen once. It claims this was a rigorously ligated experiment that terrified the medical establishment so much they buried it for half a century. Yeah. They just locked it away. Exactly. So, welcome. If you are joining us today, you are stepping into a deep dive that is going to fundamentally examine some of the most ingrained assumptions we have about health science and the institutions that govern them. We are so glad you're here with us. We really are. And our mission today is to thoroughly unpack the claims made in this specific text. Regarding alternative medicine, the alleged suppression of natural therapies, and on the underlying energy that the author argues governs both health and disease. It's a huge topic. It is. It's a sweeping multi-dead narrative that touches on everything from quantum biology to the socio-economics of the modern healthcare system. We're going to look at the exact mechanisms the author proposes, the historical context of these claims, and what it would mean for our understanding of human biology if even a fraction of this narrative is accurate. Right? But before we jump into the deep end, we have a mandatory and very important disclaimer for you. Yes, absolutely crucial. If you're listening right now, you need to know that the source material contains highly politically charged content. It makes deeply controversial claims about the medical establishment and it levels severe, very specific accusations against public figures and government agencies, including Anthony Fauci and the FDA. Very serious claims. Exactly. So, we need to make it crystal clear to you that we are not endorsing or validating these viewpoints. We are not taking sides and we are certainly not providing medical advice. Right? We are just the messengers here. Our goal for this deep dive is strictly to impartially report on and analyze the narrative and the ideas exactly as they are contained within the original text. Which is plenty to dig into. Believe me. It really is. Okay, let's unpack this. So, to really understand the author's narrative, we have to start with the foundational framework he introduces. He calls it the monotheistic medical paradigm. Monotheistic like in a religious sense? Well, no. Just to be clear, Dr. Null uses this term not in a religious sense, but to describe a closed singular system of thought. Ah, got it? Like a monopoly on truth. Exactly. In a monotheistic scientific paradigm, there is only one acceptable goal, one platform, and one set of truths you are allowed to operate within. If you step outside of it, you are just wrong. You are a heretic. Wow. So, you're excommunicated from the scientific community. Pretty much. And the driving force behind this entire closed system, according to the text, isn't the pursuit of absolute truth, but rather gaining a financial edge in the marketplace. Right? The text argues that whether you're talking about a new vaccine, a new synthetic drug, or a new ultra-processed food product, the industry is almost never asking the fundamental question. Which is what? Which is, is there a completely different non-commercial way to solve this human problem? Ah, right. They never ask that. No, instead the boardrooms are asking who is our competition and how do we differentiate our products so people buy it. It's just a mentality of endless consumption. It's all about market share. Totally. We are constantly sold this ethos that more is always better without ever pausing to look at the biological consequences of that excess. And the author provides a very specific physiological example to illustrate how this more is better marketing actively harms us. Look at protein. Oh yeah, the protein obsession. It is an obsession. For decades, the messaging has been to consume as much protein as humanly possible. But the text states that excess protein in the body is actually highly toxic. Wait, really? Toxic? Yes. When you consume more protein than your body can use for tissue repair, it has to get rid of it. The body breaks down these excess amino acids in a process called damination. Okay, I want to pause right there because I think a lot of us hear words like damination and our eyes just glaze over. Yeah, it sounds like a textbook. Right? What is actually happening inside the body when that occurs? It's a great question and it's central to the author's point about hidden biological costs. When your liver demonates excess protein, it strips away the nitrogen-containing amino group. Okay. So, it's ripping the molecule apart. Basically. Yeah. And this process leaves behind ammonia as a highly toxic byproduct. The ammonia like the cleaning supply. Exactly like that. It's incredibly toxic. Your liver then has to rapidly convert that ammonia into urea, which your kidneys then have to filter out. It's an immense metabolic strain. Man, that sounds exhausting for the body. It is. The argument in the text is that we don't actually need massive continuous quantities of protein. We need quality protein, which the author insists can be entirely sourced from plants. But that's not what the standard American diet pushes at all. Not even close. Yet, despite thousands of studies showing that the standard diet, which is, super heavy in animal proteins and processed foods, drives massive inflammation, premature cellular aging, and inflammatory cytokine storms. This daily self-harm is considered perfectly normal. And let's define cytokine storm really quickly for the listener because that phrase gets thrown around a lot lately. Yeah, good idea to clarify that. Essentially, cytokines are the chemical messengers your immune system uses to sound the alarm. When you are chronically inflamed by a toxic diet, your immune system is basically screaming all the time. Just a constant state of panic. Right? So, a cytokine storm is when that alarm system completely overreacts and starts attacking your own healthy tissues. It's a cascade of friendly fire. Precisely. And the text argues that the medical establishment ignores the root cause, which is the diet, and instead just prescribes drugs to suppress the immune response. Which flows perfectly into what the author calls the cult of the acceptable. I found this concept fascinating. It is because it points out something so ubiquitous you almost stop noticing it. Think about alcohol advertising. Oh, yeah. The commercials are everywhere. Right? The author points out that you constantly see these glowing, laughing, beautiful people dancing on yachts or clinking glasses in upscale bars just having the time of their lives. It's pitched as this ultimate social necessity. You can't have fun without it supposedly. Exactly. But the text aggressively contrasts that marketed image with the harsh biological reality of what is actually happening at a cellular level. Right. The text doesn't hold back at all. It details the alcohol literally burning the mucosal lining of the throat. Yeah. Inflaming the esophagus, wildly upsetting the stomach's delicate pH balance, and actively killing liver and brain cells. The disparity between the commercial image and the biological reality is staggering. It's cognitive dissonance on a mass scale. The product being sold isn't actually the fermented beverage. What is it then? It's the feeling of belonging. The text calls this manufacturing need. Institutions are incredibly skilled at convincing individuals to purchase things they don't actually require, often to their own detriment. And it goes way beyond just food and drink, too. Oh, absolutely. The author brings up higher education as another prime example of this manufactured need. Society pushes young people to take on massive, life-altering, non-dischargeable college debt for degrees that the text argues are actively being made obsolete by automation and artificial intelligence. Right. Well, AI is just taking over those white-collar jobs. Exactly. Yeah. Meanwhile, highly stable, lucrative trades like plumbing, masonry, or electrical work are ignored or actively stigmatized. It makes no sense until you follow the money. Right? Why does this happen? Because as the author states, no massive financial institution profits from telling a young person to avoid debt, buy a toolbox, and go to a trade school. Wow. Okay. So, if we take that concept of manufactured need, this idea that entire industries only survive by creating a dependency on their products, and we apply it to the medical system, things get really dark. Very dark. The text asserts that we do not actually possess a healthcare system in this country. Instead, what we have is a sick care maintenance system. A sick care system. That's a powerful phrase. It is. It is a massive financial apparatus driven by Wall Street, hedge funds, private equity, and ironically our own 401k mutual fund investments that demand guaranteed continuous quarterly returns. They need sick people to keep the profits up. Let me try an analogy here. It's like taking your car to a mechanic, but this specific mechanic only gets paid and only hits their Wall Street profit margins if your car keeps breaking down every 3 months. That's a terrible mechanic. Right? And if someone were to invent a revolutionary wrench that permanently fixes your engine so you never need a mechanic again, this garage wouldn't throw a parade. No, they'd go out of business. Exactly. They would actively destroy the wrench, bury the patent, and try to ban anyone from learning how to use it. If we connect this to the bigger picture, you can see why the author argues that a system based on pharmaceutical reimbursement inherently struggles or outright refuses to integrate non-toxic lifestyle-based therapies. It's structurally opposed to it. Yes. It's not a conspiracy of evil villains in a smoky room. It's a structural mandate of a profit-driven system. The text explicitly mentions the work of Dr. Dean Ornish as a prime example here. Oh, I've heard of him. The heart disease research. Right. Exactly. For context, Ornish conducted rigorous clinical trials showing that patients could actively reverse the underlying causes of severe heart disease through comprehensive lifestyle changes. We're talking diet and exercise. Yeah. A whole foods planted diet, stress management, and exercise. They were literally clearing their arteries and avoiding highly invasive stances and bypass surgeries. That's incredible. But the author asks a very pointed question. Who makes money from a patient eating broccoli and meditating? Right? No one can patent broccoli. For decades, insurance companies would completely refuse to create billing codes to pay for preventive care or holistic therapies while simultaneously reimbursing $100,000 highly invasive hospital procedures without blinking. And the text makes a staggering claim here to cap off this critique. It says that the sick care maintenance system isn't just failing to heal people. It's worse than that. It is actually one of the leading causes of death and injury in the country, specifically through what is called iatrogenic illness. Yes, iatrogenic. It's a medical term meaning illness, injury, or death caused by the medical treatment itself. So like the cure is killing you. Right? Adverse drug reactions, hospital-acquired infections, surgical errors. The author notes the deep hypocrisy and how risk is managed here. Well, a harmful, highly profitable synthetic drug can take 20 years of mounting death tolls to be pulled from the market. While they make billions in the meantime. Exactly. Meanwhile, a non-toxic natural therapy might take 15 years. Just to be allowed a preliminary trial if it ever is. The gates are heavily guarded by those who own the paradigm. Okay. So, if this purely profit-driven mechanical model is as deeply entrenched and destructive as the text claims, where is the counter-evidence? Right? Who proved otherwise? Exactly. If humans are more than just biological machines waiting to be medicated with synthetic chemicals, who actually proved it? The author argues that the proof wasn't discovered yesterday on a wellness blog. No, this is way back. It was discovered over 50 years ago in a storage room. This takes us to the pivotal year of 1971 at a facility called the Institute of Applied Biology. So what kind of place was this? According to the text, this was a highly prestigious orthodox research institute in New York operating much like the Pasteur Institute in France. Okay, so very official, very mainstream. Very much so. It was staffed by older, deeply orthodox scientists, many of whom had fled Europe during the Second World War. It was an environment strictly controlled by orthodox medicine, pharmaceutical funding, and an entirely mechanical view of biology. And into this deeply orthodox, frankly, atheistic environment, walks the author, who was quite young at the time, with a hypothesis that sounded like absolute madness to the old guard. Total madness to them. Yet, he argues that life is not just mechanical. It isn't just chemical reactions and broken parts waiting for a pill. What do you think it was? He proposes that life is governed by a measurable exchange of energy, and more specifically that positive emotions like profound happiness and intent can actively extend life, while negative emotions like sadness and stress actually contribute to the progression of disease. It was a massive uphill battle just to test this. But the author managed to secure that cleaned out storage room on the third floor of the institute to test his hypothesis. Right. The one we talked about at the beginning. Exactly. And the experiment they set up was remarkably rigorous. They took 500 rats. 500, that's a good sample size. It is. 250 were set aside as a control group and 250 were the intervention group. Now we need to be specific about the medical condition of these animals. This is the crucial part. Crucially, these rats had been injected with terminal Seitz tumors. And for those unfamiliar, an Seitz tumor is a highly aggressive cancer that grows in the fluid of the abdominal cavity. Right. Yes. It causes severe swelling and is notoriously lethal. The text states that these specific tumors normally kill a rat in a highly predictable window of about 22 days. So the clock is ticking for these animals. Then they brought in the intervention, which was 6 healers. 6 people. Right. The text names a few of them, like Dr. Dolores Cager, who was the head of nursing at NYU, and Rabbi Abraham Weizum from Brooklyn. Quite a diverse group. Very. Yet. Now these 6 people didn't share a specific religion and they didn't share a specific medical background. The only single trait they shared was a deep fundamental belief that life is sacred. But here is the absolute most critical detail of the entire setup. The thing that makes this experiment so mind-bending. Okay, hit me. None of these healers were told that the rats had tumors. That is just, it's hard to process. That is the pivotal variable. It was a completely blinded experiment. The healers merely provided focused, meditative, positive attention to the cages. They weren't trying to quote-unquote cure cancer because they didn't know cancer was present. Right? You can't try to cure something you don't know is there. And the outcome described in the text is quite profound. The 250 untreated control rats died exactly as expected, succumbing to the Seitz tumors around day 22. Like clockwork. Like clockwork. But the 250 rats that received the directed positive energy from the healers lived. The cancer completely disappeared. Unbelievable. And the author emphasizes that this wasn't a one-off fluke or a statistical anomaly. He claims they ran this experiment and replicated this exact result 6 out of 6 times. So what does this all mean? This is the part that makes you pause, right? I'm trying to wrap my head around this. He challenges everything. If I'm a skeptical orthodox scientist in 1971, I'm screaming fraud immediately. How is this physically possible? The mechanism is the mystery. Right? If these 6 healers had absolutely no conscious knowledge that they were treating terminal cancer, how did the energy they were projecting actually quote-unquote know what to heal? That is the million-dollar question. Is the author suggesting this energy acts like some kind of programmed homing missile that intelligently seeks out mutated cells, or is it just universally supercharging the host rat's innate immune system, giving it the vitality to do the work itself? What's fascinating here is how the text frames the implication of this. The author suggests that this shared energy, this vital life force, inherently carry the biological information of what to do. Like an instruction manual. Exactly. It provided the energetic instructions for extending life and restoring homeostasis rather than surrendering to disease. If we connect this 1971 experiment to modern science, it perfectly mirrors the foundational concepts of epigenetics. Epigenetics. That's a huge buzzword today. It is. The text explicitly mentions Dr. Bruce Lipton's later highly celebrated work at Stanford. Lipton demonstrated how environmental signals, including emotional and energetic states, can physically alter cellular outcomes and gene expression. Let's unpack epigenetics quickly just so everyone is on the same page. Please do. Think of your DNA not as a fixed rigid blueprint that dictates your absolute destiny, but more like a massive switchboard. I like that analogy. Epigenetics is the study of how your environment, your diet, your stress levels, your exposure to toxins, and even your emotional state can literally reach in and flip certain disease-causing switches on or off without actually changing the underlying genetic code itself. Exactly. The author is arguing that they were staring at the bleeding edge of this epigenetic truth in that storage room decades before it was officially recognized or named by institutional science. They were just way ahead of their time. They proved that intent and energy change biological reality. But the author didn't stop with rats. If human intent and emotional energy can affect animal biology that dramatically, how far does this unseen energetic network actually extend? Is it everywhere? Right? Is it just limited to mammals with complex nervous systems? To find out, he tested this on a completely different kingdom of life. This brings us to the fuss tree experiment, which the author describes as the very first study of its kind in scientific history. A houseplant. Yes, a houseplant. He wanted to see if plants could perceive and record human emotion. He placed a large ficus tree in an isolated laboratory and wired electrodes directly into its soil and onto its leaves to measure electrical fluctuations. Basically, he hooked a houseplant up to a light detector test. Pretty much. And just so we're clear on how a polygraph works, it measures galvanic skin response, essentially changes in electrical resistance caused by sweat or stress in a plant. It's measuring the minute electrical conductivity and cellular activity within the sap and tissues. Right? So, he brings in 6 participants. Again, he insists on a blinded study to prevent bias. Always blinded. Each person drew a card from a sealed box which gave them a highly specific task to perform alone in the room with the tree. What kind of tasks? Well, one person was instructed to gently play meditative flute music to the tree for 3 minutes. Another had to mist the leaves with water and hum a soothing tune. Very peaceful. A third provided fresh, nutrient-rich soil while playing symphonic music. But one card was entirely different. It instructed the participant to go into the room, yell aggressively at the plant, shake it violently, and physically tear off some of its healthy leaves. Oh man, poor plant. The participants carried out these tasks in complete isolation over several days. Right. Yes. Then the author let months pass. Months after this long duration, the researchers conducted the final phase of the test. The reveal. One by one, the participants simply walked back into the room and stood there in complete silence. They didn't touch the plant. They didn't speak. They did absolutely nothing. And for the first few people, the ones who played the flute or hummed, the polygraph needle didn't move an inch. The baseline electrical activity remained completely stable. They were safe. But then one specific person walked into the room and the needle violently spiked to the far extreme of the scale and just hung there vibrating frantically. It recognized them. Because the experiment was meticulously blinded, the author had to go in and cross-reference the logs to check which participant had just entered. It was the person who had drawn the card to scream at and physically tear the plant months earlier. Here's where it gets really interesting because it forces you to completely rethink what a plant actually is. It really does. You think of a house plant as just this static decoration sitting in the corner of your living room completely oblivious to the world. But this analogy comes to mind. The author's experiment suggests the plant is acting more like an organic hard drive. An organic hard drive. I love that. Or an emotional sponge that permanently records the vibe and the literal historical intentions of the people who interact with it. And what gives this weight is that the text doesn't leave this as just an isolated quirky lab trick. It connects this micro-experiment to massive macroecological discoveries that are now widely accepted. Like what? The author points to the subsequent groundbreaking work of forest ecologists like Dr. Suzanne Simard. Oh, she's famous for the Wood Wide Web stuff, right? Exactly. She demonstrated that entire forests are in constant intelligent communication through underground mycorrhizal networks, which are vast webs of fungi connecting roots. Trees literally talk to each other. It's amazing. When a tree is attacked by insects or is sick, it will send electrical signals and chemical nutrients through this network to warn and support surrounding trees. The philosophical weight of this claim is immense. It argues that life is fundamentally not isolated. You cannot separate a living organism, whether it's a ficus tree or a human being, from the universal energy network it inhabits. We are constantly broadcasting and receiving. And that profound realization that living things are constantly exchanging energy and holding on to biological memory didn't just apply to healing hands and houseplants. Where did he take it next? For the author, it shattered the entire paradigm of how we feed ourselves. It led him to fundamentally redefine human nutrition. Correct. The text outlines how this energetic understanding birthed what the author calls the living foods diet. He created an energy scale for food ranging from 0 to 10. So not based on calories. Right? And this isn't based on macronutrients either. It's based entirely on vitality. 0 represents dead food, things entirely devoid of life force or active enzymes like refined carbohydrates, processed sugar, and alcohol. And a 10. 10 represents ultimate energetic vitality. So living raw organic plant life. And the strict biological rule he claims to have discovered is that any alteration, any processing drastically drops a food's vitality scale. Let's trace the journey of an apple for example. A fresh organic apple right off the tree full of active enzymes and cellular water is a 10. Perfect food. But the commercial apples you buy at the store, the ones that are heavily sprayed with pesticides, coated in petroleum, EM-based wax to look shiny and stored in gas flush refrigeration for 8 months before you buy them. They drop drastically in energy. It's barely the same fruit anymore. Press that apple into fresh juice and the oxidation changes it. Pasteurize and bottle that juice, it drops significantly towards 0. Cook it down into applesauce, it drops again. He makes a fascinating point about bread, too. He points out that if you take a complex carbohydrate and subject it to intense heat until it forms a hard brown crust like a pretzel or toast or a baked good, you induce a chemical change called the Maillard reaction. It makes it taste amazing though. While it tastes good, he argues it denatures the proteins and takes the food's biological energy reading straight down to 0. Wow. And alcohol. The text says it actually registers below 0, meaning it doesn't just lack energy. It is actively destructive to cellular life, acting as a metabolic debt. To prove the direct immediate biological impact of this energy scale on the human body, the author recounts a direct blood test experiment he organized involving 100 volunteers. 100 people. How did he test them? He sent 50 of them out onto the streets of New York City to eat what he called a doctor's diet. A doctor's diet? What's that? Well, they were instructed to wait outside local prestigious hospitals, including Sloan Kettering, ask an attending doctor what they considered a healthy standard lunch, and then go eat exactly that. Which I'm guessing wasn't raw apples. No, it usually consisted of cooked meats, dairy, refined grains, and pasteurized drinks. The other 50 volunteers were sent to specific, highly vetted vegan restaurants and told exactly which high-vitality raw living foods to order. 2 hours later, all 100 people returned to the institute and their blood was drawn for a live cell microscopic analysis. The text states, the difference under the microscope was night and day. Night and day, really? Oh, absolutely. The group that ate the living vegan foods had blood that was thin and vibrant. Their red blood cells were plump, highly oxygenated and evenly dispersed, bouncing off each other nicely. Perfectly, showing absolutely no clumping. But the group that ate the hospital-recommended doctor's diet, their blood showed severe aggregation. They clumped together. The cells were stacked together like rolls of coins in a phenomenon called Rouleau formation. Rouleau formation, right? The plasma was filled with long stringy formations of fat and protein. The author argues that this immediate diet-induced thickening of the blood severely restricts oxygen delivery to the microcapillaries and aggressively predisposes individuals to clots, strokes, and chronic fatigue. This research was a direct frontal assault on the orthodox food pyramid of the time, which, heavily promoted meat, dairy, and refined flour as the absolute foundation of health. The author claims that he went on to deeply analyze beans, seeds, legumes, and tubers and discovered that they actually contained all 8 essential amino acids. Which was heresy at the time. Now, essential just means your body cannot synthesize them. You must get them from your diet. This discovery directly contradicted the standard medical textbooks of the era, which flatly stated that plant proteins were hopelessly incomplete and that human health absolutely required the consumption of animal protein. To solidify this challenge to the establishment, the author details what he called the Egg Project. The Egg Project. Yeah. At the time, nutritional science considered the chicken egg to be the absolute gold standard for net protein utilization. Meaning how efficiently the body absorbs it? Exactly. The author claims to have meticulously identified over 3,000 specific plant combinations, pairing specific grains with specific legumes, for example, that actually exceeded the net protein utilization of an egg. 3,000 combinations. Setting an entirely new plant-based scientific standard for human nutrition. And it wasn't just what the subjects were eating, it was when the text highlights a specific rat study where the author simply withheld food for 12 to 15 hours overnight, giving their digestive systems a complete rest. Just letting them fast. The result was a staggering 25 to 27% increase in the rat's overall lifespan. But okay, wait a second. I need to step in here and offer a moment of serious pushback or at least clarification for you listening. Go for it. Because if you're into fitness or health today, you know these concepts. Is the author explicitly claiming in this text that he personally was the original discoverer of intermittent fasting? And the sole discoverer of complete plant proteins decades before these things became the massive multi-billion-dollar mainstream health trends they are today? Yes, the text is absolutely unequivocal about that claim. The author states directly regarding intermittent fasting. I founded that. I discovered that. That is a massive claim. He claims to have made these specific nutritional discoveries 50 years ago alongside 176 other distinct scientific findings. And crucially, he frames the institutional delay in accepting these findings not as a matter of scientific caution or the slow wheels of peer review. No, he says it's deliberate. He frames it as a deliberate protective mechanism for a profitable industry. He argues it is fraudulent marketing designed to keep people sick and reliant on the medical system. This raises an important question regarding how nutritional orthodoxy is established and maintained. If non-commercial, highly effective discoveries are made like combining rice and beans to outperform an egg, why does it take decades for institutional science to accept them? Why hide it? The text notes, it took roughly 12 long years for his protein combining research to finally be published in a recognized scientific journal. What is the societal cost of that delay? It's immeasurable. How many millions of people suffered from heart disease or inflammatory conditions because the dietary guidelines actively drove disease while suppressing the cure? And as tragic as a 12-year bureaucratic delay in nutritional science might be, the author claims that when it came to terminal illness, the suppression of natural therapies wasn't just a slow crawl. He's far more insidious. It was deliberate. It was active. And it was fatal. If you're listening to this while driving right now or doing the dishes, you might want to brace yourself because we are moving into territory that is incredibly heavy. Heavy. The author is about to make claims that directly challenge the history of one of the darkest medical crises of the 20th century. This brings us to the most explosive and controversial claim in the entire text. The author states that at his clinic, the Tri-State Healing Center, he created an entirely natural, non-toxic, energetically based protocol that successfully reversed advanced states. Reversed it? He claims to have treated thousands of patients over a 15-year period with 0 deaths. Let me just repeat that so it sinks in. 0 deaths over 15 years for advanced AIDS patients using a natural protocol. That is a massive, almost incomprehensible claim. Especially when you consider the death sentence is associated with an AIDS diagnosis in the 80s and 90s. It was a guaranteed tragedy, and the text provides a deeply personal documented story to back it up. Decades after his time at the Institute of Applied Biology, the author receives a letter from Elena, who had been the head of science there. Right, Bill. In this letter, she confesses something incredible. She says that she has secretly taken his entire A to Z natural AIDS protocol, gathered a medical staff, and replicated the study entirely independently. On 10 of the Institute's own advanced AIDS patients. For context on how desperate this time was, patients were routinely prescribed highly toxic chemotherapy drugs like ACT, which often destroyed their bone marrow and immune systems faster than the virus itself. The cure was brutal. It was according to Elena's letter detailed in the text over a 2-year period using the author's natural protocol, they achieved a 10 out of 10 complete reversal, a 100% success rate. 10 out of 10. And this wasn't just based on how the patient felt, it was backed by rigorous histologology, expensive blood workups, meaning normalized CD4 cell counts and undetectable viral loads and laboratory documentation verified by Hoffman-La showing the physical progression of the disease actively reversing. So Alina takes this miraculous, heavily documented data to the director of the institute at their monthly board meeting. She is fully expecting a celebration, perhaps a Nobel Prize nomination. You'd think so, right? Instead, the director takes one look at the data and buries the study completely. And the reasoning he gives, as quoted directly in the text, is purely financial. It all comes back to the money. He tells Elena that if they hold a press conference announcing they have a non-toxic, unpatentable cure for AIDS, figures like Anthony Fauci and the massive pharmaceutical companies would instantly cancel millions of dollars in federal research grants. The funding would vanish. The institute would lose all its funding and go bankrupt overnight. The text portrays a truly dystopian scenario. It's a scenario where the gold standard of the scientific method, the rigorous independent replication of results by a skeptical third party, worked flawlessly. The truth was found. But it didn't matter. It was intentionally short-circuited by the economic model of science. The director's explicit fear was that a non-toxic cure posed a direct existential threat to the paradigm that was actively profiting from administering highly toxic, wildly expensive drugs to desperate young patients. The author broadens this horrific anecdote out to describe a mass psychological phenomenon he calls the fear of knowing. Fear of knowing. He references the Gestalt psychologist Fritz Perls to explain this. Perls said that a fear of knowing is ultimately a fear of doing, because if you know the truth, you are morally obligated to act on it. And acting on it is risky. Which might cost you your comfort, your job, or your social standing. The author recounts being invited to Washington, D.C. as a keynote speaker at a massive medical conference. He brought out living patients who had naturally reversed end-stage Alzheimer's, severe autism, and advanced multiple sclerosis. Living proof right there on stage. He brought them complete with boxes of their documented medical records before and after brain scans and their attending physicians ready to testify. And out of the hundreds of elite doctors and research scientists in attendance, the author notes with deep dismay that not a single one asked to review the medical records. Not one. Not one asked to visit his clinic to learn the protocol. The text concludes that they actively chose not to know because acknowledging the proof of natural reversal would destroy the status, the grant funding, and the entire medical paradigm their lucrative careers were built upon. It's like a modern version of Galileo. Exactly like Galileo. When Galileo built his telescope and proved the Earth was not the center of the universe, his academic and religious critics literally refused to look through the lens to see the moons of Jupiter. They wouldn't even look. Because they were absolutely terrified that if they looked and saw the truth with their own eyes, they would have to admit their entire worldview was wrong. It would destroy their authority. The author extends this critique beyond just the medical establishment to our broader society. He argues that our intense political tribalism, whether you identify as staunchly left-wing or right-wing, functions essentially as a guild or a cult. We just lock into our tribes. He argues that these tribal loyalties strip individuals of their critical thinking and independent judgment. The system conditions the public to trust approved authorities unconditionally, to attack anyone outside their political tribe, and to dismiss anomalous data. Even that data could save them. Even when those authorities are demonstrably hiding life-saving truths. It is a system designed to maintain the status quo at the expense of human life. So, if we look back at the overarching narrative we've covered today based on this incredibly dense source, it's a profound challenging journey. It really is. It starts with the radical hypothesis of an unseen measurable biological energy. It moves through rigorous albeit isolated experiments with tumors and rats and the astonishing emotional memory of ficus trees. The plant lie detector test. It translates that understanding of cellular energy into the raw mathematics of human nutrition, protein synthesis, and living foods. And finally, it culminates in the devastating controversial claim that these life-saving independently replicated discoveries were active intentionally buried by a systemic orthodoxy that only profits from prolonged sickness and patented medication. The narrative presents a stark urgent warning about the extreme danger of monopolies in science and medicine. It suggests that when a single orthodoxy entirely controls the funding, the peer review process and the acceptable paradigm, truth is no longer the ultimate goal. Self-preservation is. Exactly, the sheer self-preservation of the institution is. Which leaves us with a final lingering thought for you to mull over as you go about the rest of your day. If the author is right, if even a fraction of this narrative is true, and our current scientific paradigm is truly built on actively discarding anomalies and hiding cures that threaten institutional funding, well, what other fundamental human capabilities are out there? It makes you wonder. Perhaps latent healing abilities in our own consciousness or undiscovered epigenetic mechanisms in our biology are currently lying in a metaphorical basement storage room right now, just waiting for us to finally have the courage to look at the data. It's a powerful thought to end on. Thank you for listening to another session of the Geminon Notebook.art series. You can find the full archive of all my podcasts at geminonotebook.art.